Right, so we're now going to talk about enhancements to networking. I'm Andrew Fryer, joined by my good friend Simon May. Perhaps not the most exciting subject in the world, Simon, but as in everything in life, it's the little details that really make it so much better.
It is, absolutely. So enhancements to our networking infrastructure are many-fold in terms of Windows Server 2012. If we have a quick look at some of the overall things here, I really like the fact that we can now do very easy DHCP failover. I always talk about this. I think it's fantastic, having managed fairly large DHCP environments in the past. We probably won't show the actual DHCP failover environment today because we only have a limited amount of time, and there's some other really cool stuff that we want to show you. I think obviously quality of service as well, really important in this case, because we can now manage the quality of service that is available to particular network connections inside of our organisation and inside of our virtual environment, and also inside of our physical environment.
Yeah, we've been beaten up a lot by the fact we never had NIC teaming, Simon.
Absolutely.
And that's, we never had NIC teaming Hyper-V. That's why I often get asked. Actually, that's not quite the right thing to say. We never had NIC teaming in the operating system. We do now. We're hopefully going to go and show that in a minute or two.
So that means it's not just a virtual machine function. Every part of the operating system can take advantage of NIC teaming.
That's the really clever thing as well. It's a physical host function, whatever your workload is. If you've got SQL Server or SharePoint running physically, or IIS running physically on a host, it can take advantage of NIC teaming, so we can join all the networks together. But what if you wanted to have multiple NICs and team those inside a virtual machine? Well, we can do that as well, providing it's running Windows Server 2012.
Completely, and we've made other enhancements as well to make networking more efficient. Things like offloading to RDMA in order to be able to do transfers without having to engage the entire network stack inside of a virtual machine in order to be able to do that kind of offload.
So,
and also, I guess, network virtualization as well is really the key, one of our really big key differentiators for
well, there's all sorts there, and probably, frankly, the easiest way of showing some of that stuff is actually to dive into the UI, but we've put a couple of slides up here to show you what's going on. But really, we talk about VLANs a lot, but what we're talking here about is network virtualization, and that actually becomes a lot clearer when we get into the world of System Center in our session a separate session that we're going to run tomorrow. If you're watching it live, or it's a separate session you can pick up and watch if you're watching this recorded, as a download. So what we're able to do really is say that if we've got a service, and if we move away from thinking just about individual virtual machines and think about a service, you've got a website, maybe a database back end, those are tightly coupled, they expect to be on the same subnet, they need to know where each other are, and as basically we move that service from one host to another, and it could be a completely hosted environment right outside of our data center, we need to be able to keep those IP addresses and that network information going with it, no matter what the infrastructure is on the actual physical host. It's on a different subnet, we could be in a different country, frankly.
Yeah.
We just want to be able to move that service around. So we've got that built into Windows Server 2012, but it's not immediately obvious until you turn on System Center.
Absolutely, because all of the controlling for that, which is available in Service 2012, all done through PowerShell. Yeah. Because it's very, very deep, very, very intrinsic stuff that we have to do as part of the part of the OS and part of the move. And really, in order to be able to absolutely accentuate that, we really do need a really good management layer over the top of it.
Yeah, and it is typically for the enterprise as well. So.
Absolutely. So NIC teaming, obviously one of your favourite features of Windows Server 2012 , and
I've got some. There's one there.
Absolutely, and we have some network cards that we're going to be using for a team. So we're going to be doing those in and out of places around. But what is NIC teaming? What does it actually do, Andrew?
Well, it's basically trying to get a whole bunch of networks to behave as one, and we tend to think about disks joining into a RAID array and acting as one big volume we can splash stuff onto, a bit like we did this morning. Wouldn't it be good if I could say an example of this laptop? Simon's got some NICs here, Belkin USB NICs, and he's just plugging them into the USB ports, and we can connect that spaghetti up to our switches at the front here, and essentially then I should be able to get, with a bit of magic, three connections into the port, and therefore get 3 gigabits per second out of this laptop rather than just one.
Absolutely,
which would be awesome. The clever thing about it as well is that normally when you buy NICs, you buy them from the same vendor. They're in the rack in your server, and you use the vendor's software to make them into a team, and we've had some issues around that on server core and various driver issues. Doing it in the operating system liberates us from the need to have NICs in the same manufacturer.
Absolutely, so we could pick NICs from very different manufacturers. We could, I guess, also, technically, we could create a team of networks teams, couldn't we? We could do that by using the vendor's card.
We could do that, but you'd be crazy too. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. Do not create a team of teams. Just create a team, Okay, and to do that, we would just go into the what you can see going on here, as well as that by doing this, we've got the increased bandwidth for all our virtual machines or whatever service actually we're running. It's not just for virtual machines. We've also got some redundancy in there. So if we take a card away, then we can still carry on tracking. Our network's going to continue to function, and we'll just route that traffic onto the different cards. It gets better than that as well, because those individual cards could be connected to different switches, and depending on how you set NIC teaming up, whether you use LACP or you go switch independent, you can have those cards going into different switches, and you've got switch redundancy, so the virtual machines can still talk to the outside world.
So we have proper grown-up NIC teaming inside of Windows Server 2012.
We do, and of course it's inside Windows, so we know how to manage it. We've got PowerShell, we've got WMI to monitor. We're in a good place.
Absolutely, and if you have network cards which are capable of doing RDMA offloading, what we can actually do is, for SMB traffic, we don't have to have all of that go directly through the whole network stack in order to be able to land on that network card. So we can actually bypass particular parts of the stack. If we think what we'd normally see, we'd normally have to pass down certain bits of information through that stack, down to the transport drivers, down to the network drivers, down to the network card, and that can slow things down a little bit. With RDMA and SMB3, we can just bypass the NIC driver because the network card actually understands the SMB traffic that we're sending down to it natively, which puts us into a really cool position. If you want to try that kind of thing, you need to be using something like InfiniBand in order to be able to actually do that right now. There aren't very many RDMA offloading network cards available at the moment.
But then that's like all the hardware improvements we made, whether it's our client or server operating systems. We put something in and we say, for example, in Windows 8, we talk about touch. Maybe there aren't that many touch devices around. But we're having this conversation when we're all old and grey.
Absolutely.
Touch will be ubiquitous, and we'll say, why haven't you got touch in there? And it will be the same with these cards. It's the same with all the scale as far as processors and memory that we see in Hyper-V and elsewhere. But this is just one example of what we can do, getting back to the topic of what we can do with networking. There's a whole bunch of things we can do to talk directly to network cards in a virtual world, and a whole ways of protecting them that we can maybe dive into the UI and have a look at.
Yeah,
so perhaps
absolutely.
We'll
let's do exactly that. Let's dive into the UI and have a look at what's going on here.
So first of all, we dive into, probably first talk about NIC teaming.
Just wait while the stream kicks in. There we go.
Very good. Yes, that's the power of the team. So I'm going to go into Server Manager, and we can see, whoops, there's something falling on the floor, hopefully not mission critical. If I go into my local server here, I'm just going to do it locally. NIC teaming is disabled. We can just click on this link here, and we can now see down here we've got some cards we can talk to. Not the ones with the V in front, those are virtual switches, but I can have those too, hopefully, if I can just work out to use my keyboard here where the shift key is on. That's it. I can right click on those two guys. Whoops. Well, I'll just, get off. Simon, just not be, this is joy of being left-handed sometimes catches you out. Where's the shift key on there? That's it. Okay, right click, add to new team, finger trouble here. And we'll call the team, what is that? Reading, we can call it Reading.
We're in Reading, aren't we? So we might as well use Reading FC.
Reading FC, yeah, I think they're called Reading FC. I'm not really into football. Right, so that's the team, Reading FC. Let that go. And now that's done, if I just dive, and also I can do this from my local server as well, which I quite like, is if I just dive onto, click on the hyperlink there, you can see now that we've got this thing called Reading FC has appeared just here. Simon, yes, thanks. So you can zoom in. Now what I could do is I could bind that to a virtual switch in Hyper-V instead of the one that I've got. And moreover, I could then take out that switch that is bound to that NIC that's bound to that virtual switch, and then add that into the team as well. So I can have disparate NICs in there. I'm not going to go through all that malarkey now because we got quite a bit to cover. We just pan out again. So that's how quickly it is to create a team, and there's a whole bunch of PowerShell to make that work as well.
So what can we do in terms of actually extending what we did with that switch just there? There are some advanced options that we might want to have a quick look at.
There are indeed, yes. So, sorry, if I just go back to my, I think that's my, is that my teaming there?
It is.
Yes, so if I go right click on this and look at its properties, additional properties down here, this is where I can decide whether what's on the other end of my, my team.
Yep.
Is it static, switch independent, or LACP, depending on how sophisticated your switch is? How are we going to load balance? So if we think about it, we're going to send a packet one way, then we're going to send a packet another way. Packet one way, packet another way. Well, if it's all coming out of a bunch of virtual machines, it's all going to come out the same NIC. The hash will look largely the same. So if we can introduce the virtual machine ID into the hash, the virtual machine port into the hash, then that gives us a way of splitting up that not all the Hyper-V traffic ends up going down one one part of the team. So we split them all out, yeah? Then you could have a standby adapter, but I'm kind of thinking, why would you?
Yep.
Because you get the power of using my 2 gigabits like this, and it will drop down to 1 afterwards. So that's what we can do in there.
And because we just configured all of this through Server Manager, and we saw earlier, we could do this remotely on any server.
Absolutely,
so
we could.
Obviously, we'd need to be physically there in order to plug those NICs into that particular server. But from that point on, we can go and just take any of its NICs and remotely configure it, remotely add them into the team, and not actually have to worry about being in there in person.
Yeah, so there we are on London 2, which I'm currently on London 1 at the moment, Simon, and so I can absolutely do that.
And the massive power of that is, come a world where we're actually running in server core, we don't need any UI on that remote server in order to configure its NIC teaming.
No, and that has been an issue for us on server core, because some of the NIC teaming software presents a UI and server core goes wibble, and I can't do that for you, and you can't configure teams on there. So we've lost that advantage of having that. We talked about in our other session on Hyper-V mobility about how you can run that. On multi-server management, right session. So watch the session on multi-server management, and we talk about that. We can do this good stuff with that lightweight interface now, so that's really good.
Absolutely.
Right, so what I want to turn my attention now to is the exciting world of networking in a virtual world, because increasingly now we're running everything virtualized. So first of all, if I go into Hyper-V settings, we can see, if I go, not into Hyper-V settings, into
Hyper-V Network, Virtual Switch Manager.
Virtual Switch Manager, I'm sorry about that. We can look at our CorpNet that we've been using for our demos here, and we can see that we've got the extensions. Now, I don't want to talk too much about this, but what we have the ability to do is to make this switch look like a Cisco switch to a Cisco network engineer by putting other people's extensions in. So we've written extensible switch, which means other third parties can see this and work with it. So we're trying to play the interop card, Simon, because we live in a heterogeneous world.
And I'd note there that we've actually got a VMM DHCP4 server switch extension injected into our virtual machine here.
That's right, and we'll come back to that tomorrow, because what I didn't show you while you were having coffee this morning is that I've actually put this under Virtual Machine Manager extension, so you can actually see that Virtual Machine Manager itself is starting to talk to Server 2012, because I'm using the SP1 beta of Virtual Machine Manager to do that. So good spot.
Yep.
Let's have a look at the settings of an individual virtual machine. I'm just going to pick up say my London DC here, and the reason I want to pick that one particularly is because we can see some interesting things on here. If I go into my switches down here, CorpNet, first of all, hardware acceleration. This is what you were talking about, IDRMA. We can offload IPsec to the card directly, so it's not happening inside the virtual machine, it's happening on the switch, if your switch supports it.
Absolutely, and that's really key, because that will actually offload some of your processing time, where you'd normally be processing those IPsec computations. That can now be done on your network card. Fantastic. The same with SRIOV.
Pretty much. Now here's the secret sauce. If you do this on other people's virtualization software, and I think, I'm guessing this is what happens, I have enough trouble keeping up with Microsoft stuff to know about other people. But if you turn this on, you can still move this virtual machine around. We're not limiting its mobility.
So these little bulking cards we've plugged in here, these are SRIOV enabled.
Well, they could be,
They could be SRIOV enabled network cards. No, I don't think so. They're also USB 2 gigabit cards, which is always interesting. But if we had one of these in this machine, we didn't have it in our London 2 machine, I would still successfully be able to migrate my machine, even if we had SRIOV turned on for our original host. Yes,
you will be able to move it, live migrate it. We'll just disable that feature as we do the move.
And that's because the hardware is not available.
We're not going to block the move, okay? Other things to note are that how many people have had a rogue VM pop up and act as a DHCP server and kill your environment?
Well, if you're Microsoft IT, that probably happens to you on a daily basis when we turn our demo environment on.
Yeah, we've got to be really careful what we plug into here. So we can turn on DHCP guard, router guard to stop all this stuff getting out there. And we can set that up when we provision the virtual machines. That's pretty cool. And finally on this network adapter is we can enforce bandwidth management.
Yeah.
So we can specify the minimum maximum bandwidth for this particular VM and start to deliver a service-based approach, quality of service-based approach on this machine. Now, one tip here for you, if you're trying this and you are downloading it, I know because I've tried it and Simon caught me at it, is if you check this box and leave it set to 0, that's exactly what's going to happen. There'll be no bandwidth coming out of this machine, but it will be there. And
Absolutely.
That really threw me the other week. So put some numbers in if you check the box.
Which is a really good way, if you want to start to mess with the guys in HR or something, you could start to throttle their bandwidth right down. That's probably not a really good idea.
Never mess with the guys in HR,
Yeah,
Simon.
absolutely. Absolutely
Okay.
not.
So we've got networking going on in there. Let's have a look at some other. If I go up into here and I add some hardware into this virtual machine, Simon, we can add network adapters in. But hey, look, fiber channel, another kind of network adapter. What if we could put 4 HBAs into a virtual machine and talk directly to our fiber channel SAN?
Absolutely. Well, we can now do that, can't we? We can add fiber channel directly into a virtual machine. We can then do exactly the same thing as we would with switching inside of a network idea. So we can actually have a virtual fiber switch, and then when we pick up virtual machines from host A and move them to host B, we can recreate the exact same fiber switch environment on our second host that we have on our first host.
So we get to a virtualization first, where we can move all our virtual workloads in a very scalable way. We've got scalability issues here addressed, basically. With the power of this. So that's a lightning run through of just some of the things we can do. Other things that we might want to do to cut down on networking, for example, is if we have got a SAN, and I did want to copy that 2 terabyte virtual machine from one part of my SAN to another part of my SAN, wouldn't it be good if I just told the SAN and did an offline data exchange rather than using up my network, CPU and I/O to do that with?
Absolutely. So in that session that we saw earlier on, when we were doing that storage migration, if we had 2 LUNs on the same SAN, and we needed to move that data between those virtual machines between LUN A and LUN B, the SAN would deal with that, as opposed to us having to put that onto our IP configured network and move it across the network. Pretty clever stuff.
So that's a quick look at virtualization network in the virtualization world, not virtualization in the network world. But there are some other things that we've done as well. I mean, one of the challenges I know that you face when you work for large organizations is dealing with DHCP, Simon.
Absolutely, yeah. Managing DHCP, configuring failover. The way that we used to do that is we used to configure a split scope where we would assign 50% of our IP addresses to one server, 50% to another server. And that was a fantastic way of configuring DHCP and being able to build DHCP. Very, very difficult though, and required you to be able to balance that load effectively. Now we have the ability to, I think it's 3 clicks that we actually have to go through in order to configure failover for a DHCP server.
I want that one, don't I?
You want the second one? In order to be able to configure failover for a DHCP server, we have to do 3 separate clicks of the mouse, which I think is really hard. After, of course, we've set up a server with the DHCP server role. So it really does bring down that ability. In fact, something that anybody can do within about 10 to 15 minutes of downloading the Windows Server 2012 evaluation, set up your DHCP environment to play within your lab environment, and then start to actually build a failover environment for DHCP.
But in megacorp, or even actually in smaller organisations, the other problem is you've got DHCP servers sitting all over the place, doing different things, and you've got no idea how well your address spaces and so on is being used. So the other feature that we have in Server 2012 that I want to conclude with is IP address management, which is pretty much what it says on the tin. It's another role that you install. It has a little database sitting on a particular server. It doesn't even have to be running DHCP. You then tell that server about all your DHCP servers and all your DNS servers, and it tells you what's going on from one pane of glass across your entire estate. So I think that's super useful. You can also then actually start managing scopes as well, not just monitoring. But you can do that centrally rather than going around the houses and trying to work out what spaces and addresses you've got less, particularly if you're working in that IPv4 world where you might be running out of addresses.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it can be super important to get that right.
Completely. So we've just very quickly gone through, shown various features of configuring networking. We've shown NIC teaming. We've shown a little bit of virtual networking inside of Hyper-V and all that cool stuff. There's lots more that we can show you there, and lots more to go away and play with at home. Just before we conclude the session, we'll just move through to give you a link to where you can go and download the Windows Server 2012 evaluation. We've been banging on it about it all morning this morning. Download this, take it home, try it out. Send us an email with to the UK IT Pro and Microsoft.com alias, and we'll send you a t-shirt if you successfully download the evaluation and send us a screenshot of your installation there.
And extra credit if you can turn on that DDP feature?
Absolutely, yeah. If you can turn on DDP, send us an email, and we'll send you some extra credit for that one as well. So that concludes where we are, and we're now into what will be our lunch break session, so a 30-minute break session. And when we come back after the break, we will be moving on to Windows Azure, and Steve Plank will be up here to talk about Windows Azure for the afternoon session. So just before we do, There were a couple of questions that came in across the previous session, one of which Andrew is absolutely chomping at the bit to be able to answer.
I've been presenting now for 3 hours and I haven't mentioned SQL Server.
No, you've not, absolutely. However, a SQL Server question has come in for you. Are there any instances where you wouldn't consider virtualization of Windows Server 2012?
With Hyper-V?
With Hyper-V.
I can't think of any, simply because if I look at the barriers to adoption would be perf and scale. Well, if I can put 64 logical processes into a virtual machine and give it gazillions of RAM, it's going to run really quickly.
Yep.
I can have my storage, I can use pass-through disks, or I can pass out onto an SMB3 share, so the database itself could be on different storage than the virtual machine itself. I've got high availability in SQL Server 2012, so I could use always-on availability groups rather than using the replica feature we talked about in our Hyper-V session. But I've got a choice there, what I want to do. It might be that I would use replica because I've got a small application where SQL Server is bundled on the same VM and I want to move the whole thing over there. But in a more distributed environment, I might decide to have my always-on replica running over there at a remote site and my SQL application running somewhere over here. I think it's maybe rather the question also ought to be is which bits of SQL Server 2012? I've just talked about databases, then I could talk about business intelligence, but I think even there, with the amount of RAM and processor we can put into a VM, I reckon I can do really good BI on Hyper-V, run analysis services, integration services, some of those other tools, if you've got the hardware to do it. Is it worth paying, a different question, put it back to whoever asked this. You're going to lose 5 to 10% of your performance when you virtualize SQL Server. Is that a price worth paying, considering the agility and mobility that you've got? I would submit it is, but that's your own decision. Anything else, Simon?
Very good answer. Yes, somebody actually did ask us if they were going to be able to download the decks that we've been using today. Hopefully. And the question to that, the answer to that question is yes, of course you will. We'll be having the decks posted up onto the UK TechNet blog so that you can download those decks after this session later on today. And also, all of these sessions will be made available offline. Give us a couple of days to get through the edit of all of this because you won't believe how long that actually takes. We'll get this stuff edited out and published back out again using the UK TechNet blog.
And we'll be back tomorrow for more on Windows 8 and
System Center 2012, won't we?
So we've been Andrew Fryer and
I'm Simon May.
Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much.